On today's episode.
I think a little bit of the shell game that goes on is when society keeps telling you your children can be a burden, or as I get older, I don't want to be a burden on others. The presumption is that, first of all, burden is always bad. And I don't think that's a valid presumption.
Yeah.
Hadley Arkes, but I heard him like 30 years ago give a presentation where he made the statement, he goes, we're always talking about trying to get rid of burdens and not being burdens. He goes, I'm convinced that the fabric of America is strengthened by its ability to carry burdens.
Welcome to the Life Challenges podcast from Christian Life Resources. Our world today presents people with complicated issues of life and death, marriage and family, health and science. It can be a struggle to understand or deal with them. We're here to help by bringing good information and a fresh biblical perspective to these matters and more. Join us now for Life Challenges.
Hi, and welcome back. I'm Krista Potratz, and I'm here today with Pastors Bob Fleischman and Jeff Samuelson. And today we're going to talk about this article that Jeff had found when we had done our current event episode for last month. One of the articles that Jeff had come across, we did not cover on a current event episode, but when I read it, it really impacted me. Mm-hmm. And I thought, man, we got to do a whole episode on it. And the title of the article here is called "The Day I Wanted to Be a Father." And it is written by, I think of him as a young man, but he may be my age. I don't know.
No. We'll still call that young.
Okay.
Yeah, from our perspective.
But a young.
But the point of the article is he's not as young as he used to be.
Exactly.
He's at least in his late 30s.
Exactly. And he talks about this moment in his life where he knew he wanted to be a father, and it's just a very interesting article. And interesting too from the male perspective. I know we've talked on the show about people that have realized later in life, maybe they want to be a parent, and maybe more too, like with women, like realizing, okay, the clock's ticking, so to speak. But this was just a very interesting perspective from a male for this article.
Yeah, there's been some statistical stuff that's come out recently showing that in like teenagers and young adults, particularly women in America, are no longer saying, "Yeah, I think I'm going to get married and have kids when I grow up." That's no longer part of their their life view of things. And obviously, if women aren't interested in having children, that's going to severely limit the amount of children that are born. But there's not as much attention paid to the men, and in most cases, it takes two.
At least this year. Yeah.
So you don't have to think very far to find examples, whether it's on TV or people within your own life or whatever, who are thinking, men who are like, I don't want to be tied down with kids. This is one of the things that really was a push toward the abortion. That it freed men from the responsibility of having to be a father. If they got somebody pregnant and that woman got an abortion, they were free. They didn't have to worry about that. Birth control also helped with that. And so just not as much attention is paid to men. And there are many more men who are just, they see fatherhood as not necessarily a bad thing, but just not something that's for them. It's going to be too much of a restriction on them. It's, going to take time and money away. And, it's fine for other people, but not maybe for them.
The article raised for me a number of worldview points. In other words, whether you realize it or not, you're always wrestling with the question of why am I here? What am I supposed to do with my life? And oftentimes, the default mechanism in the world is I live for me and I live for my goals and objectives. And now I begin to chart a course. I train for a profession that's going to allow me the greatest amount of happiness and to accomplish the greatest amount of good by my set of standards. And that's kind of where he was coming from. What made the article fascinating was how impacted he was by positive role models presented by his parents.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right under the title of the article, The Day I Wanted to Be a Father, it says, How I mistook the feeling of completeness for permanence and missed the inheritance I was meant to pass on. And as Bob was saying too, the author does go on to say that he grew up in a home where his parents loved each other. They showed it. They were affectionate towards each other. He grew up, I think he even mentioned too, that he had a brother who was his best friend. Just a very positive home environment. And that almost, in his mind, made him think like, yep, got family, check. and he just never really thought about maybe the importance of having a family of his own, because he was so loved by the family that he had.
Yeah, and one of the things that, when I shared this article on social media, I commented on how, for someone who says he doesn't believe in God, because at the very end, he says, I've always been wary of labels. I don't believe in God, but I avoid calling myself an atheist. My comment was, for somebody who is not ready to call himself someone who believes in God, he's right there touching the reality that God has a design, and fatherhood is part of that design. Because you just quoted the kind of the subhead. I mistook the feeling of completeness for permanence and missed the inheritance I was meant to pass on. Well, if you're an atheist and you don't believe there's any meaning to the universe, how can there be an inheritance that you're meant to pass on? He's touching something eternal. He's touching something permanent, something spiritual, something very real. And he's not yet at the point where he can put the proper name on it. But it's something that we as Christians can say, aha, you're knocking on the door there. But it's a wonderful truth. And I certainly hope that there are men who read this and say, oh, yeah, that's something I should be appreciating too. And I haven't realized that this is something I've been missing.
Mm-hmm. It was interesting too, because I think he said he never really thought that he didn't want to have kids growing up, but it was as he got older that became maybe more part of his identity. Just seeing how people would say that kids were burdens, and that you wouldn't get to do all the things you wanted to do in life when you had children. And he really bought into a lot of that, and then realized as he got older, he became more firm in the, I don't want to have kids. He made sure to find relationships with other people that didn't want to have kids. Mm-hmm. And just then that slowly became part of his identity, that he was somebody who did not want to have a family, did not want to have kids.
Mm-hmm.
He had mentioned in the article about being part of that Reddit forum on, just basic
media.
Yeah, just people saying, all the freedom we have for not having children. And it just reminded me that it is our inclination to always surround ourselves with people who we think like we think we want to think, so invariably you constantly are getting.
That's why I come every week to your house.
That I know that is, yeah. And look at what it's done for you. But no, I mean it. But you find yourself doing that, and I mean even Christians, we sometimes do it, and we need to be grounded in something foundational like Scripture. But there's nothing wrong with having contact with contrary views, because sometimes they force you to evaluate your own. But his solution was, I'm going to go onto this forum, this social media platform, and I'm going to just kind of continue to talk and chat and get reinforced in my convictions about being childless. And it was also interesting, kind of alluding to what Jeff was saying, how there was something knocking at the door, something nagging at him that was indicating that maybe he's incorrect on this. Now, I don't know. I can't remember if he references, but I don't know if he's ready to say everybody who thought about not having a child, you're not necessarily wrong, but he really
He got close to that.
he got
I
very
think,
close
at
to
the
it,
end of the article.
and he
Yeah.
put a lot of meat out there for them to think
Mhm.
twice. Because the one thing about life is that as you go through the stages of being dependent on mom and dad, being independent of mom and dad, admiring mom and dad, feeling like your family with mom and dad, and then, of course, for him, he reached that cross section during COVID, when he with his father, and then saying, "Well, Mom, there's a timeline here,"
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden you come to the conclusion that maybe there's something bigger here than everything I thought and imagined.
Yeah, I know. As Bob was saying too, the author of the article got to the point where it was during COVID, where he had moved back home with his family, and they were all kind of one again. And then his father took a very hard, very terrible fall, and it was at that point that the author just realized, I guess, that this whole like little family unit that they had was not going to last forever, that his father was not immortal, and that he would pass at some point. And then it was kind of like, well then what?
Yeah, there's a I won't mention the name of it, but someone I listen to their podcast and I read their stuff or whatever, and it's he's not a believer. He has a Jewish background, but he's also somewhat. His mom was Christian, and it's confusing or whatever. But anyway, his dad died, and then his only brother died, and then his mother died. And he had to deal with the fact that he realized that he was the last one of his original family left. Fortunately, he does have a daughter, but only the one. And I'm just listening to him talk about this at various times, and just like, and the pressure then that puts on his daughter, not in a negative way, but just like that she's the only one carrying this on. And it's one of those things. It's a strange juxtaposition of things. On the one hand, you realize that this is part of something eternal, that you're carrying this on, you're passing this on, and if you don't have kids, the generations stop with you. And that's not good. But on the other hand, there's the realization, and this is part of what motivated the author of the article. You only have so many Christmases. You only have so many Thanksgivings. You only have so many birthdays that you get to share together. And if you're thinking, oh, well, it's just going to go on forever. And that's one of the problems with our current society right now, is that we have removed death so far from our consciousness that we tend to just think, things are just going to keep on going forever the way they are. And that makes it that much more troublesome when reality strikes and we realize, oh, I didn't have all the time that I thought I had. But this should be something that helps motivate us to take a closer look at our lives and what our priorities are, and also then to remind us that my mom's going to be around forever. Well, no, she's not. Mm-hmm. Or I'm going to have no end of opportunity to spend time with my son. Well, no, you're not going to have, there is a limit to that. I mean, I'm looking at a milestone birthday in March, and, just realizing, okay, I'm going to hit 60 here, and all right, how many years do I have left? Even if I live to 90, I've lived 2/3 of my life now.
In our world, we call that circling the drain.
Yeah. I just had a birthday, and Bob sent me this email that said, well, for life expectancy of women, you're halfway there now.
Yeah.
I was like, thanks, Bob. That was the most depressing birthday wish I've got.
I'm known for my bedside manner.
Yeah. But, in a situation, one of the things he mentions in the article is that even if he succeeds in becoming a father, and the interesting thing is, he doesn't mention that, there's any prospect in the pipeline, so to speak, of, it's like, okay, what's it going to be like for my child is not going to get to know his grandparents. probably, or at least not as well. And I'm probably going to be an older dad, which means I'm not going to be there for all the things that I should be there for as a dad. And this is increasingly an issue now with everybody having children so much later in life. There's a lady at the gym I go to who's, I think she's only in her mid-40s, and she's already a grandmother. What a wonderful thing. She's going to have so many years with her grandkids.
I'm not ready.
Yeah. But if you're, if you don't have your first children until you're in your late 30s or maybe even your 40s, they're not going to have much of a relationship with their grandparents. And it's going to be one of those things when you're not going to have much of a relationship with your grandkids because there's just going to be too much time there. Each new issue of Clearly Caring invites you to think deeply about the critical life issues of our time: medical ethics, end-of-life care, family, and faith. Grounded completely in God's Word, this free periodical from Christian Life Resources helps readers navigate complex moral questions through a biblical lens. Read Clearly Caring free online or have it delivered directly to your home at no cost. Visit ChristianLifeResources.com and look under Publications for Clearly Caring.
The crux of the article really was that there's a legacy. It continues on. And he was so profoundly influenced by his parents, and he saw that as such a great thing to pass on. Now, as someone who has raised a few children, you're fairly convinced, before you have children, that you're an expert on how everybody else should be raising their children. And then by the time your last one moves out, you felt like it was a train wreck. It's amazing they survived childhood. But then I watched my children and their children interact with my parents, and it provided hope. I mean, because I've often said that I had the best parents in the world. I mean, my parents were profoundly influential on my life, and they were on my children's life. And my one daughter, a couple of months ago, because my dad passed away 10 months ago, and my one daughter about 3 months ago, she said, Dad, you are the family patriarch now. Which, of course, reminded me of that little sign I got hanging in my workshop that says, it's weird being the same age as old people. But but there is this legacy that you pass on. And I feel that I did what I thought was my best in raising the kids. But doggone it, I sure hope they watched closely how my dad did things and cared for my mom. I mean, I still remember one day going into the guest room and looking out the window, and my mom and dad had come back. And those of you who don't know, back in 2000, we built our houses together on adjoining lots. So I can look out my office window and the guest room window and see my parents' house. And I was watching my dad help my mom out of the car and up the steps. And I remember being so profoundly affected by that tenderness and that compassion that I would say that is like a running video stream in my head as I'm now the caregiver for Diane. And I think that this is kind of what he was getting at. I think out of the whole article, the part that struck me the most was when he wrote about counting down the Christmases and the birthdays, because that is how it works. My dad was 90 years old when he died, and he died unexpectedly. But you would think at 90 it would have been expected, except otherwise he was doing great. He was cognitively, he was completely with it. And he was looking to be mowing the lawn the weekend that he died. That's how he was. And that affected the succeeding generations. And I think the people who knew him were the richer for it. And I think that's kind of what the message he was beginning to receive. Now, there's a Christian perspective we can put on all this in terms of the role we have of teaching our children the things of God and what your worldview should be with God at the center of it. And he did not have that. But he had a lot of that relational stuff that is so profoundly positive in a world that is, I think, turning so profoundly negative.
Yeah, no, I think too, yeah, when you talk about that idea of inheritance and that, it's not
The
just
legacy that you
yeah,
leave. Yeah.
yeah, like it's not just, the money and I mean he said too like I'll just read here from the article. It says like, I don't care about traveling anymore. I've seen enough. I don't care about my intellectual legacy. How many more essays do I really need to write? All I care now is being a good father. And so it's kind of like, yeah, what really is life. I mean, for us, for a Christian perspective, we get that and we understand that, and we see God working in us through different things. But for the secular world, yeah, like I think too, one thing that I got from this article was that there is this, even the secular world, I mean, especially them, this idea, the importance of family. We see it every year with all the Christmas stuff and like, oh, the true meaning of
Mm-hmm.
Christmas is being together. It's
Mm-hmm.
family. It's that type of bond. And so, and you can see like in this article that was so important for the author. Like his family was so important and I don't know if that like kind of clouded him from the future, but then he realized that, oh, family is important and I want to pass that on and be a part of that.
Yeah, and I think it touches again on that universal design that God has for us, that it could just as much be somebody who grew up with a really bad family situation, or in essence, no family, being resolved that much more. I'm going to have kids and give them what I did not have. That still is that sense of, yeah, there is something more that we were created for. God said, be fruitful and multiply right at the very beginning. It is part of our purpose. I just want to be clear, this is by no means to condemn people who are childless, particularly if they're unmarried, or to suggest that somehow they're living contrary to God's design or whatever. But the overall purpose for humanity includes this. And we get to participate in that, which is a tremendous privilege. It just seems so strange to think that we will think it's good and proper to say, no, I don't think I want that, to this wonderful thing that God has privileged us to be a part of.
And I think too, one thing that was interesting about the article is I had thought too, like, okay, I'm going to be reading this article about a man who doesn't want to have kids. He must have had a terrible upbringing, right? And he didn't. Like, he had a great upbringing. And so it just shows to me how far this, I guess, idea has seeped into our culture, that no matter now whether you had a great family, you didn't have a great family, you can still really think that you don't want kids and that kids are a burden no matter what type of background you came from. I don't know, just that like it seems that doesn't really matter anymore. You can have a great background, you can have a terrible background with your family, and you can still get to that place where you just view kids as a burden and you don't want to do it.
He made this one comment. He said, until I have children of my own, I still view myself as a child in some sense, unfinished. And it's interesting because as a parent, you view your children still as children. I mean, I've got children older than Krista, and so which is getting to be fewer
They're
and
still
fewer. The
young.
odds are, but no, I got children older than Krista, and yet you still see them as your children. And my parents oftentimes acted that way, even living next door. A lot of times, some of our listeners may have heard me tell the story about when we took my parents out for dinner. It came time to pay for the meal, and immediately my dad wanted to pay for the meal. By that time, I had 5 children. I was head of an organization, had been a pastor for a number of years. By most people's standards, I'd been out on my own. But your parents still see you as the child. I thought it was interesting that he saw himself as the child. And I don't think I felt like a child at all once I moved out and started having children until my dad died. Then all of a sudden, I felt all of the insecurities of a child. And yet your family, my children, become an incredible support mechanism. And over the years, I've encountered a number of couples who did not have children by choice. I agree with Jeff. We're not talking about the people who couldn't have children. We're talking about people who chose, for one reason or another, to pursue their career, to travel, to do whatever they want. And then when it came time to wanting to have children, they found that they couldn't for whatever reason. And they felt insecure. They felt like, who's going to take care of us? And that's going to be, and it won't probably be on our this month's podcast on world events, but I do have it plugged into next month's already, where we're looking at how people are trying to find substitutions for physical flesh and blood, namely AI and stuff like that. And this guy genuinely longs for a flesh and blood legacy. And I think Christianity can find this as a relationship or a bridge to then talk to them about the ultimate flesh and blood relationship that we have in Christ.
I just find myself wondering in kind of a chicken and egg situation. It's like this idea of children as a burden. I mean, that fits in very much with the pro-abortion argument. It's like, oh, well, you've got to have this right because you don't want to be saddled with a kid that you don't want or that you're unprepared for or whatever. Because children, they're just a hassle. They're just a burden. And then that relates to this idea of, well, yeah, even when it's voluntary, children are just going to hold me back. They're just going to keep me from enjoying life. And it's a very self-centered point of view. But which fed which? Was it the pro-abortion arguments more, kind of trying to get that? Or was it more this other idea of just kind of this me first idea that got very much into our society? I mean, which really, it's hardwired into human nature, but it got acceptable to speak that way in our society within the last few generations. Yeah, I'm sure there isn't really a causation there. One came before the other, but it's, they happen at the same time. But it's the kind of thing that it's very helpful for us to recognize that this is what's going on so that then we can counter that. There's, I believe it's Live Action. One of the pro-life organizations has been selling shirts and T-shirts that say, "It's good that you're alive." And it's a very simple, basic pro-life message. But I think it addresses the same kind of idea. It's like children are a blessing. They're not a burden. It is good to have children. And that is just not something that comes across anywhere near enough in our society today.
When I read the article, all I could think about was that Nicolas Cage movie, The Family Man.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of, because he kind of went the route of being child-free, and then all of a sudden things flipped around for him. And it was just a very interesting, and it came to mind when I...
And the thing too, like about that movie, it kind of was a process for him too to get to where he was at the end of the movie. Because I'll just say it too, like kids are a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
It is, like it just, and it does change your life, and things are just different. But it's such a blessing to be able to do it too.
And I think that's critical.
Yeah.
Right there is, I think a little bit of the shell game that goes on is when society keeps telling you your children could be a burden, or as I get older, I don't want to be a burden on others. The presumption is that, first of all, burden is always bad. And I don't think that's a valid presumption. Yeah. Hadley Arkes, I can't even think of where he's at now. But I heard him like 30 years ago give a presentation where he made the statement. He goes, we're always talking about trying to get rid of burdens and not being burdens. He goes, I'm convinced that the fabric of America is strengthened by its ability to carry burdens. And you just used the other B word, that is, it's such a blessing. Carrying a burden sometimes has an incredible way of taming your evil inclination. It's just like, I just don't have time to get into trouble right now.
Yeah.
But why? Because I'm carrying so many burdens, and that's a good thing.
It's kind of just like this ball of a lot of different stuff, when you have kids. I mean, I just think about just even my experience like this past week or two, and it's like, okay, yeah, like you have kids that are sick or just things that are going on or things that limit you in certain ways. And then, but then like I'm sitting there last night in church next to my 7-year-old who is singing this beautiful hymn. And it just like warms your heart, and there's just nothing like it. I mean, it's just it's such a blessing. And so there's constantly things like that where it's like, yeah, you maybe have these hard moments or these hard things, but then you have this beautiful joy, or you see their face light up with this Christmas gift or going out for ice cream or whatever it is. And it's a package deal really with all of that stuff.
Yeah, burden carrying could be wonderfully rewarding. Christmas time is, and that's why that phrase stuck out for me. Christmas time is always a very sentimental time for me, because when I watch my children with their children. It's like just a constant rewinding of history. I'm always looking at the kids and thinking about when they were kids. We used to have this crazy practice, and that when I would get the tree all decorated, before we'd put the skirt on and we'd put the nativity set underneath the tree, I would, all 5 girls and I would lie down on our backs and go under the tree and just look straight up the middle of the tree. And I said, now blur your eyes a little bit. And it got to the point that the kids even talk about it. This is 30, 40 years later and stuff like that. And to get them to that point, there were a lot of messy diapers. There were a lot of sick kids. There were a lot of, having to adjust, the bedrooms so that they could all get along and all fit in and all that all these burdens. And if you were to ask me right now, was it worth it? You bet. In fact, you could double all that we went through to raise them. And I would say it would have been worth it. But what I think Jeff has touched on a little bit is just seems to be our evil inclination seems to blind us to seeing and searching beyond the moment. At best, we might look at how this pathway is going to be best for me, but you are never alone. You are never alone. And it's a social world, it's a social environment, and you may chart your own course, but you're always going to be interacting with people, including the legacy you leave, the children that follow you. And if you're really going to be this wonderful impact on the world, can you imagine what happens when you're populated with more little ones like you, and they can carry it forward?
Well, thank you both for talking us through this article. And we, just encourage all of our listeners to, if you haven't had a chance, we'll link it. Please take a look at it because really it is quite an interesting perspective too. If you have any questions on this article, please let us know, and we'd be happy to get back to you. You can reach us at lifechallenges.us. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. We are very appreciative of all of our listeners, and we know that this is all made possible because you listen. So thank you so much for that, and we look forward to seeing you back next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us for the Life Challenges podcast from Christian Life Resources. Please consider subscribing to this podcast, giving us a review wherever you access it, and sharing it with friends. We're here to help, so if you have questions on today's topic or other life issues, you can submit them, as well as comments or suggestions for future episodes at lifechallenges.us or email us at podcast@christianliferesources.com. You can find past episodes and other valuable information at lifechallenges.us, so please check it out. For more about our parent organization, please visit christianliferesources.com. May God give you wisdom, love, strength, and peace in Christ for every life challenge.